and it is our today. Also, it is the 1/20th code-free day, and I saw several proposals related to the code freeze, but most of it is actually is not. And I also want to go through that our planning 1.21. I think most it is already updated, either already almost in or already in, or some is already pounded to the next release. So let's start today. Oh, I need the record first. I always forgot.
It's already being recorded.
Oh,
yeah, I clicked the recording. That's fine.
Thank you, Derek. And let's start our normal meeting with the PR and charge status and also the test results. Sergey, Alala, do you want to?
Let me kick off. And so first, we did outstanding work this week. There are kudos to all people sending and updating PRs really quickly and people reviewing it. It's great. I mean, we did way more than we typically do, like 67 PRs merged and 20 closed. It's a lot of progress. I mean, typically I use this dashboard to review what happened in a week, and looking at the 67 PRs merged, it's a lot. I mean, you need to understand how much work is happening in our SIG. So yeah, I mean, great work. Let's keep it going. I mean, we only have 1 day left for PR merges, but after that, maybe after code freeze will end, we can keep up the pace again.
Yeah, I'm a little bit guilty because I think a large chunk of those are structured logging related. And I know code freezes today, and you may have seen that I also requested an extension because I don't think we're going to get the kubelet fully migrated by the end of day today. I am very hopeful that the release team will give us an extension at least for the kubelet logging migration, just because having a half migrated kubelet and then waiting until the next release to finish migrating it will be really disruptive. But they may hold off the graduation of the rest of the feature to beta, which would be fine. But I asked for the whole thing to be extended. We'll see what they say. I have not heard back yet, I don't think. So that has certainly been responsible for a lot of logging, a lot of the churn. And I can share the board if somebody gives me co-host.
Let me give you. Yeah. Okay, you are free to go.
Great. So this is the SIG Node board, and I'm just going to also pop in if Firefox will cooperate with me. Structured logging, which I'm tracking separately, and what was the last thing that I wanted to show? Oh, the CI board as well. Too many tabs open. So definitely, as Sergey said, velocity has been very good. It has been pretty impressive to watch things go. And I've mostly, for the SIG Node board, just been sort of dragging things into triage and watching them get triaged, because I have not been doing triage this week, only for the structured logging specific stuff. Structured logging stuff, because there's so much of it, like over 35 things that we're tracking specifically for that. I have a board just for structured logging stuff. And so that's kind of all in progress and making its way. And then in terms of where we're at for the SIG Node test enhancement stuff, I keep dragging stuff on here and it keeps getting triaged. So if you want to get involved with any of these projects, we have specifically like guidance on the boards in terms of like, how do I help? What should I do? I don't have, org status, or I don't have like reviewer status. What can I do in order to help out? How do I get to the next stage? All those docs are available.
Yeah, and just kudos to you guys for getting the board together. It's been really helpful at optimizing my own personal time. And so I'm sure it's helped others. So big thank you for helping this.
Yeah. Elena, actually, a lot of people mentioned to me, say SIG Node have the dramatic change, and they want to learn from this, from you about how to track, how to manage those things, organized.
Oh, that's great. The chairs meeting, I think the monthly chairs meeting is today, and I am going to be talking about like how to. I know Lori also put a thing on the agenda for different SIG practices and best practices and project management and that kind of thing. And so I have an item on there as well for like training new people to become tech leads and SIG chairs and that kind of thing for some of the other SIGs that are wanting to bring in new people but aren't really sure what to do or how to improve their processes. So that's happening today if you are a lead or for some reason are on that meeting invite.
Cool, thanks. Let's move to next topic. Jack, I already granted you the co-host. I know you have the doc share. Maybe you want to place it there. So next one, we'll talk about the live prop timeout issue. That's kind of a regression, but it's with the full good intention. So you maybe want to talk about this one. Jack? I saw Jack earlier.
Yeah, he was definitely here.
Yeah, he's the first one join the meeting because I opened the meeting earlier today. And yeah, I saw him earlier.
Okay, how about you continue, Dawn, and I'll go chase Jack down and we'll slot him back in later.
Sure. So let's move to next topic. Francisco, do you want to update the pod resource API?
Yes, thank you, Dawn. It's me. So he had a few cycles of review thanks to Kevin. Kudos to him. He did great reviews. So unfortunately, we need approval. He cannot approve himself. He gave looks good to me though. So here I am asking for approval because I added the feature gates which were in turn requested during the production readiness review. So that's it. Please, folks, have a look.
Yeah. I was, before this meeting, I was in process to take a last look and I about to give approval. So I'm on this one.
Thank you.
Derek?
Appreciated.
Yeah. Derek, do you interest?
Yeah, I mean, I had reviewed it earlier and I think I asked Kevin to take a look, and a lot of my comments were just, it was confusing terminology that I think has been updated now in the PR. And so I'm at this point okay with, as long as those changes were made, it looks fine to me.
Great. Thanks. Elena?
Oh, I just wanted to, I'm doing the bad thing that I'm not supposed to do, which is tell people to review my PR. I only got API review yesterday on it, and I am nervous about the code freeze cutoff, but I've addressed all of the comments. So I think it's just a matter of hopefully, fingers crossed, the alpha end-to-end tests pass.
This was for the probe timeouts, Alana?
Yeah, I finished all the implementation work and I've had the PR out for about a week, but nobody has really taken a look at it. And Clayton, I poked him again. He did the API review yesterday. There was a bunch of stuff that I was not aware of because it wasn't documented. So I went and did all of that. And I think it's ready for another round of review.
Okay. Yeah, I can take a look.
Thanks.
Dawn, I believe Jack is back.
Yeah, I saw Jack is back. Jack, do you want to carry on your topic? And let me give you the co-host because I know you have the doc share here. Just 1 second.
Cool. I'm not sure I'll actually share the doc because it's so large, but I will happily paste in some link matter here for folks. So hey everyone, real quick, I just wanted to bring to folks' attention that there are some people who are working within SIG Node and SIG-Arch and WG conformance to sort of figure out how we want to deal with the exec probe timeout feature flag going forward. So a little bit of background. There's a lot of background in that document that I just pasted. With 120.0, the longstanding bug for exec probe timeout enforcement was fixed, which is a great thing. A side effect of that is that all timeouts have default values if not declared in the user spec, and that timeout is 1 second, which for liveness probes is arguably a little going to be a little impacting for folks who aren't used to being able to declare those. And so what we've been doing in the background is trying to make sure that this flag, which allows that behavior to be disabled, which is kind of funny because it's really disabling a bug fix, but we want a little bit more time to disable that so various Kubernetes providers out there can choose to kind of map out their own timelines for communication to their user community, how they need to start including timeouts with all their exec probes, and then possibly, in a best case scenario, give some more time to investigate possibly increasing that timeout. I know that's a non-trivial thing, so we don't have to go into that now. But I wanted to paste some issues. Mainly, this is just a call out for RFC for anyone who's interested in this. So I have an issue myself and a PR that does some kind of boilerplate removal of code comments. So in the code at main right now, it suggests we're going to remove the flag in 121, which we're not actually going to do. As Don mentioned earlier, we're actually at feature freeze, so nothing further is going to merge. But I wanted to advocate that we sort of more formally define when this flag will be officially disabled. So that's what that issue link is to, and then the PR updates the code comments. There's also another PR doing a similar thing, which bumps it to 122. So if folks are interested, just follow those two issues, or that issue and that PR, and you'll get all the detail. And then I also finally wanted to paste a link to SIG-Arch. So we're going to talk about the same thing. I'm on the roadshow right now on Thursday at 11 Pacific, 1900 UTC. Basically the same topic in SIG-Arch as this touches their interests as well. So in summary, there's no emergency or fire drill from our perspective. The flag exists, so if folks want to disable timeouts because they don't want that default 1 second, they can continue to do so. There is one issue that we're tracking sort of more aggressively, if that's not too strong of a word, and that is that the SIG conformance tests right now currently fail if you set that flag. So there are folks in the background trying to make this feature flag something that doesn't inherently fail conformance. So we'll be working on that. And I'm done. I'm happy to answer any questions, engage in any discussion.
On the topic of conformance, is that a 120 conformance suite against a 120 cluster, or is there like version skew between the conformance versions against the cluster that is causing the issues?
It's the former. Lucky, are you familiar more with the nitty gritty? My understanding is that the cluster was built with this feature flag disabled, which is a way of saying I don't want exec probe timeouts to work. And the conformance test has a new test that validates when you submit a spec without a timeout, that it times out after 1 second. So the conformance test seems to be not sensitive to that flag. Essentially, the cluster's in a configuration where it's not going to enforce that timeout, and the conformance test assumes that all 120 clusters must enforce that timeout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
So the issue was specific to the Docker shim. Given that I think as a SIG, we want to figure out a conclusive state where the Docker shim is either taken out of the kubelet and handled separately. Like personally, I don't like giving anybody
this wasn't
stress sakes, I guess.
It was for both, for CRI and Docker shim. It wasn't Docker shim only.
Is that okay? If that was the case, I thought maybe my memory was poor. I thought it had just been.
Yeah, there is a difference between Docker shim and CRI. On Docker shim, you not like we start respecting timeouts, but prod is still running after we kill a client that makes a request. So that's the difference. Your memory is correct in there is a difference, but actual bug was fixed on both.
Derek, maybe can you?
I guess what I was trying to say, like, if for the Docker shim specific behavior, I have no issue in preserving the existing feature gate until Docker shim is removed. Yeah. If it gives people, heartburn. You know, like I don't think as a SIG we want to upset users who have real production issues or concerns, but I had thought that this issue didn't impact CRI implementers in the same way. And so, sorry, I guess I have to refresh my memory on what the behavior difference was, but I thought the timeout was respected, but there was something related to the gRPC call flow that made it behave differently. So I have my own homework to refresh on.
Jack, can you confirm on our testing? Because basically the way that we came across this is everything lit up red when we started testing against 120. And then I think we're testing on CRI with container D under the hood, right, Jack?
Yeah, you know,
we're not using Docker shim.
I could go back and test it. It was actually, I mean, there are releases of 120, pre-releases that did not have the change. The change kind of came late in the 120. So it was like, as we went, this is hypothetical, from say beta 1 to beta 2, it was in beta 2 that we suddenly noticed certain tests that required a liveness probe to take longer than 1 second and didn't have that timeout declared. Those tests started failing. We do test container D and Moby on my project. So I can do some homework and confirm whether or not this is particularly related to one CRI
or Docker shim
over another, or if it's general.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
unless Sergey or someone else
knows
how the code works and confirm
reiterating what Sergey said, like the API behavior where the exact probe timeout was not respected is exactly the same between container or CRI and Docker shim. The only difference worth calling out is that Docker shim will run that exact probe indefinitely, and it doesn't actually do like a context cancel on the process. Whereas container D, it didn't respect the timeout, but then after the timeout, it would kill the process and stop it from running indefinitely. That's the only difference.
Got it. So from a user perspective, it's sort of similar whether you're using Docker or container D.
Was the timeout on the container D side or on the kubelet side? Like, was the behavior local to container D or local to the kubelet?
The issue in the behavior was from the kubelet, not passing in the context timeout when it made the gRPC request to CRI.
And I think, you know, just advocating for the users here, this is what we've seen is folks will upgrade their cluster and have workloads without the timeout defined, and they will not pass liveless probes on, you know, anything that takes longer than a second. So I'm, you know, so as a, you know, putting my, you know, work at Azure hat on in something like AKS, we either have to choose whether we want to break users or break conformance currently. So we're trying to not do both, but we need the help from the community to help us, you know, guide us through a decision here. So we're kind of advocating to leave the flag off. We want to have it on, but it's going to take time to communicate. And we're worried that users today will go into 120 and start to break. So that's one thing. And the other thing is we don't want to have non-conformant clusters. And I don't know, you know, this is a discussion for performance, I guess. Should there be flags dependent on their state that break conformance? I don't know of too many flags that you set on kubelet or otherwise that have a bubble up effect that break the conformance profile in the conformance suite.
The legend, what do you request all makes sense. I believe what the JIG, if I understand what JIG earlier proposed, so yeah, we're going to leave that flag, disable that, and at the same time, and I believe he and work with the people to fix the conform test. Once that flag it is on, so the basic conform test will based on, at least for this feature, and will based on the feature gate. That's what I understand. And so far here, so we are working on those kind of things. So that but how to long term and to turn on this feature and still not break off the existing user, that's another story. And we can come back, discuss. And I haven't read Jack's proposal and the document yet, but I think that we should figure out a way from the community, because that's the good fix. But how we are going to mitigate existing customer which have the dependency on the broken feature, and that's another story. Let's discuss, come back and discuss more on this way. I guess the Jack maybe have some like the alternative how we are going to move forward, but I haven't read that yet. I haven't heard him mention clear previous.
Yeah, it's my proposal is really simple. It's to continue to keep the flag in a enabled mode. So we want new folks landing on 120, building new Kubernetes clusters to get this new functionality, this functionality that should have been working all along. And then to just extend the life of the feature flag so certain folks can choose to turn that off because they run Kubernetes services, for example, that support lots of users who've been on Kubernetes for a long time and have built-in production workloads that assume that no timeout functionality is going to intervene on the behalf of their liveness probes. Hopefully that makes sense. So just more time for that feature flag to be user opt-in.
And during that time, have the don't break conformance.
That's right.
Yeah, so is there a PR open that says skip this particular test in conformance if feature gate is disabled?
If you agree with that, Derek, we can put in a PR to fix that. We just wanted to get kind of high level approval with the plan. I think in the doc, Jack kind of lays that out, but we didn't want to go just jamming PRs in without talking to you all first.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I mean, we should still verify that the probe occurs, but we should just not expect a 1 second timeout. So find some other reasonable mechanism that represents the pre-120 behavior. Seems perfectly fine.
I'm also wondering, as a side note or as a mitigation, I mean, we could add like an admission control, like an optional admission control that extends only exact liveness probe timeouts to like 5 as a new default or something. Like, do we think that would be valuable at all to users?
I would honestly, I think that's a possible solution for folks, but I would say let's table that and let's come to a consensus around the fact that we're going to extend the current feature flag and then decide. I think we should publish, like, let's say we're going to make this available till 124. We should just publish that so it's super clear. And then I think those conversations are super interesting, Andrew, about how we can either refactor the code under the hood, which currently assumes a common type definition for all timeouts. We can maybe extract those so that liveness probes and readiness probes can get different timeouts. We can make it user configurable as a, there's a lot of things we could do.
Yeah, sounds good. And like, yeah, in terms like feature gates are cheap. So, I personally, at least for me, like we can leave that feature gate on until 130 or however long. Like, I don't think, anyone objects to that.
Andrew, actually, I want to correct. Feature gate might not be that cheap if every feature owner add that one and level clean up. But I just want to make sure and people, because we spend the time trying to clean some feature gate over many release, and but I totally agree for this particular issue because due to the legacy, and we can. Make this is relative compare all those risks we can expose to the user. This is much cheaper and much lower risk. I just want to make sure that people don't think about the feature gate is so cheap and so all the feature like this way. So so I like you earlier say that if we could for long term we can think about maybe some different timeout value, and so we could relatively safe to enable this feature and reset our current status, because the current status basically we just have to live with that bug, right? So the reason we want to fix that bug is just because the customer came to and they say this timeout value is not respected, and which is make them certain feature cannot reliably rely on this kind of things, or their workload cannot rely on those things. So we still need to fix this problem, but how we are going to safely turn on this feature, it is hard because current problem it is on the it's not on the user side, right? So it's our problem. So on the node we easily enable this feature or disable this feature, But on the node could be some really rely on the bug behavior, or some is want to have the real behavior. So we need to think about some like the better way to handle this one. Like I think earlier someone mentioned maybe like the user config something, which is really concern from API perspective, but we could discuss more later.
I have to admit, I'm still really not seeing how the code change was universal to all CRI implementers. I see that there's an issue that says conceptually, if the probe time was longer than any gRPC timeout we allow in the kubelet, we would be confused. And it seems like we should maybe think about upper bounding and some validation that says this is the standard gRPC probe timeout. But I think, I mean, Mrinal, you can chime in, but I'm looking in the background here, and it's like, depending on what the CRI implementer itself did,
right?
Container D had different behavior than, say, Cryo did. So
Yes.
causing me confusion.
Well, Derek, I can easily run a 119 test with Container D and just post it to the issue, just to share.
But yeah, I easily believe that like the Container D implementation might have done something that returned an error response that may have tripped us up, but it didn't seem like it was universal to all CRI implementers. And so that's what was confusing me, because the code I linked to here is just saying, oh, let's look at a deadline exceeded as slightly different, versus the majority of the change was changing how Docker shim behaved, which was clear. But yeah, Mrinal, maybe we can follow up on this after the SIG, but I just think it's not universal to all CRI implementers.
Yeah, so I think we had a change where we were returning the error that the kubelet expects on a timeout. But I still need to look closer to see like what would happen if you are at the 1 second boundary. We may still get a deadline exceeded on the kubelet side, even though Cryo is trying to return the message that kubelet was expecting earlier. So I pasted a link in chat. If you guys can take a look and chime in.
Yeah, either way, I do think if we're going to look at this, we need to set an upper bound on all probe timeouts that won't exceed our gRPC timelines, and I'm not sure how to roll that out, but that seems like a good thing to also do as a follow-on to this activity.
So can I just, sorry, Dawn, you go ahead.
Please, go ahead, please.
Can I just confirm our marching orders here? So Jack's just going to test. I know our infra, we can test Docker shim and cry with Container D on 119, 120. Jack has put, I think you have some standing PRs at the moment that somebody could review to extend the comments on the deadline of that flag being deprecated. And then the other thing that's additional that we haven't done at the moment is update the conformance test to basically say, if the flag is on, can you do conditional conformance tests based on flags? Derek, I don't know the code behind that. But if the flag is on, run the test. But if the flag is set to off, don't run the test. And we'll get that into 120 so that 120 clusters with this off are conformant. Is that the action items here? Are we in agreement?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And I'll give you an example of like the pattern we have to already do this. So here's a PR I did last week that skips a test if a particular feature gate isn't on yet by default. And it's perfectly fine. We do this in other elements.
Excellent. So we'll come back to the next meeting and just give you a laundry list of PRs.
Derek, we don't allow conformance. Well, we can add a test like that, but we can't mark them as conformance.
Yeah.
You could run the same test, you just wouldn't check for the timeout, right? Like these tests existed before 120. It's just how long do you wait for the timeout?
I see. So within the test, there is a conditional check.
Yeah.
Okay.
We should still test probes, but it doesn't mean that maybe the timeout part is the only part that we block, right? That's what I was
thinking. Yeah. The test itself can't be optional based on a feature. That's what I meant.
Yes, I agree with you, James.
Okay, thank you.
That's what we agree so far. So we can come back after the code phrase, talk about this more and how long-term things. And there's so let's go to next one. And Jim, you want to talk about run container, runtime, Kubernetes, and a different mount namespace follow-up. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hello, I'm happy to meet many of you. I was here last week. There was much lower attendance. So I'll just do a real quick overview of sort of what I'm proposing here. And I'm hopefully going to be building this into a KEP, but just sort of gathering some information beforehand about if there are any well-known issues that would make this a horrible idea. But basically, the idea is that right now, as far as I understand it, there's a mount propagation test in Kubernetes that says that when a mount is done by a container that has mount propagation set to bidirectional, it is available to the container itself, it is available to the container runtime and kubelet, and it's also available to the host OS. And what I think I would like to suggest is I would like to make it possible when you install Kubernetes to make the choice to install it such that both kubelet and the container runtime are in a separate mount namespace from the host OS. Now, the reason for that is really about specifically in Linux with systemd. It seems that systemd has a fairly high CPU utilization when you have a large number of mount points. The reasons for that, and if you follow the note in the meeting minutes here, there's maybe some more details in the discussion that I posted to the SIG Node mailing group. But basically, systemd rescans mount points, and when you have a huge number of mount points, that's exacerbated pretty significantly. So if you hide all of the container-specific mount points away from systemd so it never sees them, the systemd CPU utilization on a fairly large system drops to almost zero, and that's a fairly important improvement. So the only cost of this from the perspective of containers and the container runtime is that anything mounted by a container would still be visible to kubelet and the container runtime, but it would not be visible to the host OS or anything that's sort of running in that same mount namespace as the host OS. I'm looking right now to see if there are any specific use cases that we know that this would break. I haven't found any yet. I have even trouble thinking of use cases that would break, because top-down mount propagation would still work. So something mounted by the host OS or something running on the host would still be available to the container runtime and containers, conditionally based on the mount propagation flags, of course. Likewise, anything mounted by a container could propagate back up to the container runtime mount namespace, and then from there back down to other containers. And I believe, as far as I understand it, this sort of meets the need of almost every CSI that I've had a chance to look at. But it does definitely change sort of this, guarantee of what the environment looks like where Kubernetes is running. And since that's kind of a small change, but also a very large change, that's kind of why I'm in this information gathering stage, if that makes sense.
So Jim, I listened to the proposal last week and then also this week, and have had a little bit more time to think about it. And to me, like, this sounds like a system debug, so I'm not sure why we would work around it in Kubernetes. And the things that sort of stand out to me is systemd is like a multi-purpose init system. It should be able to handle a large number of mounts. And it should also be able to handle saying, hey, these mounts are requiring a lot of scanning and rescanning. Maybe I'll just ignore those. Is that something that's been pursued? Because that seems like the more like in terms of, sort of separation of responsibilities, what you're proposing sounds like a hack. And I would like to try to fix systemd first before we do the workaround, because systemd isn't working, because this seems like something systemd should just do.
Yeah, and I totally agree that being a systemd bug that we're trying to work around here. Yeah, there are efforts underway to actually fix this inside of systemd. Unfortunately, that is not moving very quickly. And there are two other reasons why this would be, I think, a good thing, aside from the systemd workaround, which was sort of the original impetus for actually taking on this. And those are just from the perspective of like encapsulation. A lot of these mount points, if not all of these mount points, are things like secrets and config maps and things like that. These are really like implementation details that are about how kubelet exposes resources to containers is not really something that the host OS needs to know about. And that in a way goes to what I think is a minor security improvement, which is if these mount points aren't visible to that sort of top level host namespace, a regular user saying, you know, find mount or just mount, show me all the mount points. Right now, they get really detailed information into sort of the exact locations where all of these secrets and config maps are mounted, whereas they would not get that information anymore. You'd be sort of hiding that information from regular users unless they have the capabilities to actually enter that mount namespace. And I think that that's gated behind like cap sysadmin and something else. So not a huge security improvement, but I think it just one level of inspection that a potential attacker would have today would be removed in this. So those are not really like important reasons to do this, but you know, in addition to the systemd workaround, that would, I think, be a benefit. I also did get a response from someone who was saying that for the kind, it might be a useful feature to allow specifically for that use case. But that was just sort of an early, someone perking their ear up to say, this sounds like it might be aligned with what we want to do, but haven't had a lot of discussion with them yet.
Yeah, as far as the mount points go, and like, you know, oh no, there are a lot of mount points that are exposed to the system, and like those are a Kubernetes implementation detail. I'd argue like trying to hide those to me seems like if that's an implementation detail, like it's either it is valuable for that to be exposed to the system as is, or it's maybe a suggestion that like Kubernetes should reconsider how it is implementing this. And it's a smell that we don't want to sweep under the rug. So I don't necessarily think that it's like, you know, a bug that we see this right now. I think it's important to be exposing that, yeah, that is how we're doing this, and that we can access all of these things through the normal mount ways, and that they are treated as one would expect any other mount point. Whether or not that's a good thing right now, I mean, I think that's a much wider conversation, but like if we were just hiding those from end users, like I don't think that that is necessarily an improvement.
So I think one more angle here is like for systemd to be able to fix this, it needs change to the kernel. Like changes are proposed to the kernel in the way that it propagates changes for new mounts. And that is something that isn't going to land anytime soon. So I think like basically what we're trying to do is due diligence here to check that nothing breaks if we make this change. And so far, like based on the responses we have seen on the mailing list, we haven't found a concrete example of a case that will break. So the only thing that we would really need change is this one test. So we are relaxing that instead of propagating to the host, just propagating to the kubelet and container runtime won't break you. And then it's a choice for you. Like if you want to propagate it to the host, no one is stopping you from doing it. But like if you want to hide it, like if you want to solve the systemd issue, if you want to hide your mounts, if you want to kind of launch multiple kind clusters and hide their mounts from each other, those kind of use cases, then I think this is useful. So initially I was also hesitant, but like since the effort like Jim has put into gathering feedback, I haven't yet seen one concrete use case that would break by enabling this. So
this is going to be entirely dependent on how a node is configured. It's like, does somebody run services on that node that needs those kubelet mounts in order to operate? You know, maybe it is a CSI driver. I know you said you checked everything, but it's stuff like that that's going to end up breaking, and it's going to be very host dependent. And somebody can, like, if somebody wants to hide them, they can already do this by setting that in the systemd config as it is, right? They can just set the right propagation in the systemd service.
Right. So the case you're talking about would mean that the CSI service is running outside of a container as a native systemd service or whatever init service, whatever init system you're using.
Sure.
Otherwise,
CSI
it would be visible.
Or you know, whatever. Could just be something on the node that's running for supporting the cluster in some way.
Right. So I think
to
what
point that out.
Yeah, so I think what we are proposing is not like an moving from the current model to the other model. What we are just saying is just relaxing what the environment requirements are. So the test which currently looks for the propagation to the host would also continue to work if your kubelet and runtime are in a separate mount namespace. And then you decide on the basis of your like CSI implementation, whether your CSI needs to run as a host service or within a container. And then you can pick whether you want this isolation or not.
So Mrinal, obviously in the past we had supported running kubelet in a container, and then we've had to back away from that. Is the mount namespace the only issue that we see here that we would get big bang from, or is this like, should there be concerns on this as a slippery slope into just supporting containerized kubelets again?
So I think like so far for this particular thing, we have only used looked at mount namespace, and Derek, I think that's what came to my mind immediately when this was initially proposed. Like we had backed away from this in the past, but this looks like a narrower thing than what we did before. So maybe workable, and so far like Jim has only found this one E2E that is failing.
Seth, did you want to jump in?
Yeah,
Sorry?
I mean, I was just saying to level set on it. I mean, we're not looking to make a change to the kubelet code, only that test. And the higher level question is not, can we change the test? It's, is this a conformant Kubernetes cluster, right? To do it this way. And if it is, then if we decide that it is, then we can relax the test.
Right.
If it's not, then we need to have a reason why it's not, and the test stays strict, and then we can't do this.
Yes, Seth. Yep.
Yeah.
I hope other people from other side chime in, because this the mount propagation feature initial proposed by SIG storage, and those like the too many mount points issue actually raised by SIG Node, and we do raise some concern, but it's insist for certain deploy option, but because we have to trust that that's from the SIG storage, so that's why we take that, and so that's also is based on the deployment from Red Hat. And then I noticed that all it came from the OpenShift deployment. Then we saw the problem. So I want to see like other side deployment, and is this going to, this change is going to bring some like the regression or not? Because we do have monitored, because we used to have the SIG Node perf test monitor the node resource usage, especially for the Docker, Kubernetes, and all the other daemon side have to live on the node. So we did monitor some like the CPU utilization bump up during those certain deployment. And that's the concern we raised. But then we live with, because that's, we believe there's the use cases, and we have to propagate to the host OS. So, I a little bit agree. I don't know all the context right now because I haven't read that email yet. So, but I do agree at the Alala, say like a head from the user, and head that one actually maybe have the potential problem. Also in the past, actually we do found some systemd problem. We did actually Kubernetes community did push a systemd fix, right? For example, when we first talked about the C group version 2, and the people push very hard on the systemd, and end up the systemd cannot support the hybrid mode, so we push it back and ask them to support both the C group version 1 and the C group version 2. So there's the several of the change. This is one change I remember. There's the several change at the earlier container runtime interface development. And we also found some systemd related issues, so we push back. And so it is possible. I just kind of, if we do think about that's the initially reasonable use cases and the deployment, why we think about we don't need that one. Could be situation change, because I do remember that came also from the OpenShift deployment. Think about that's the reasonable approach. So now we think about it is we don't need that one, so we need to call out other deployment, other like the vendor, and say like it is that no regression. I don't see much people come chime in here. I personally don't know. Honestly, I have to admit I don't know the GKE side, and is there a problem? I personally don't see the problem so far, but I also don't know the detail on this one. But I just want to throw here. Always.
That's all fair feedback, Dawn. So I think, Mernal, you noted that systemd itself is blocked until a kernel patch is executed.
Yeah.
Does the issue get, and so to be clear, my understanding here is it's not a systemd bug, so it's inaccurate to classify it as such.
Right.
And so given that, is the kernel patch in this thread here that people could go review? Because
so I think, Jim, you had linked to the kernel issue somewhere, right, in your notes?
Yeah, let me make sure that I've got that. But basically, yeah, there's a Red Hat Bugzilla that was sort of my introduction to this, and it looked like that had deeper links to the actual changes, but I can double check that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure as a community, we're not disparaging other communities when the bug is actually not that community's bug. And from that perspective, like Kubernetes should work well at minimal levels of pod density, where my understanding of this issue is that it's not working as well as it should. And from that perspective, like as a community, I would think we'd want to bring down our overhead. I just want to make sure we all have the right visibility into the core issue and maybe some understanding on when the kernel itself may be addressing that issue or not to make an informed choice.
Yeah, is there a write-up of how this specifically like affects Kube in a Kube context on like the Kubernetes bug tracker? And if not,
sorry, I missed the end of that.
If there isn't right now, can we get one, a write-up on the Kube bug tracker?
Yeah, sure, I could write something up for that. And I think it's really like kubelet itself is not affected by this, except that there's less CPU available to it and other pods because system.
I think if it's like a node level concern, then it's totally valid to say like, hey, you know, it's not necessarily that it affects the kubelet, but it's like, oh, all this CPU is going off to do this other stuff, and that's bad for the node because that's less CPU for workloads. So.
Fair.
Yeah, so my understanding of the use case here is you're in an edge deployment and you want to be able to use your CPU as you see fit. And the fact that managing a process under Kubernetes is more expensive than maybe traditionally managing under systemd is an impediment to adopting Kube, which seems like a bad thing for us as a community. And so I'm far more open to this if we understand the root issue. And to me, the root issue is not systemd, it is the kernel. And so if we can just get clarity on root issue and maybe revisit this next week, we can come to this with broader perspectives, I guess. But to me, managing a process through Kubernetes shouldn't incur such an overhead to make someone not want to use Kubernetes. And running 400 mount points, I don't know if that what number of pods that map to, does not seem like excessive numbers of pods that we shouldn't as a community look to fix. So
yeah, I mean, that was like out of the box OpenShift with no workloads basically, and that's, you know, systemd was sitting around 10% effectively idle, but just keeping the CPU nice and hot.
Okay.
Before we move off of this, I mean, we're talking about like, I mean, I think we're talking about solution space here, but backing up to the initial question of Kubernetes conformance, and that is like we have API guarantees and things like that. Is this effectively like, is this a functionality version of an API guarantee is really what it comes down to me. Is it's like once a behavior is codified in a conformance test, like, do we say we are not going to change it? Like, is that behavior not changeable? Is that like a guarantee going forward, or is a conformance test changeable? I'm not sure what users expect, right? If you go into the conformance test and you're like, okay, anything that a conformance any behavior that a conformance test guarantees for me, I can assume will always be this way. Is that reasonable for people to think? Do users think that way? I guess that's where I'm going down on this thread.
It says, I think if we change some like the user configurable API level things so dramatically, so I do think about that's kind of forbidden. But unless basically no, even there's the user like the API specific, but no, we already migrate user off from that particular API. We have confidence, right? So I still think about it is arguable, or it is could be redefined that behavior. The system always have to evolve, so have to be the case by case. In these cases, I already see that Jim did a lot of due diligence and try to see, do we have use cases? Looks like we don't, at least in that thread. I also don't know, but I just want to call out earlier, like, because that behavior actually is insisted by the previous SIG storage and OpenShift, and also other. My problem is right now at this moment, other vendor maybe even don't know they are rely on that one. You know, so it's just like the proper liveness, proper timeout, right? So obviously from day one, by design, that's not the right behavior. But the customer might already rely on, and the vendor even don't know customer already rely on. So that's my a little bit concern here. So we need to think about how to, obviously what Jim stated, the problem is really not acceptable problem. And but I remember this problem is being raised in the past, and the corresponding answer, it is basically that's the knowing issue, and it's going to fix later. And I forgot to fix it, but not outside of the Kubernetes. That's going to be addressed. So this is the problem. And are we going to? So we maybe could say, oh, that's actually previous claim we are going to have that use cases actually is a false claim, and we don't have that use cases, but we need to have confidence. So far, I'm not sure. I don't see the use cases, at least from GKE, but I don't think about, I know all the use cases from the GKE, and then I don't know other vendor. That's the problem today. But I do think about the OpenShift already say clear, because do the due diligence, maybe see that one, they don't need these cases, which is good. So we may need to think about some way to fix this problem at the node level. And we don't care about it's the kernel or systemd or Kubernetes. We are open to fix at whatever things to provide the best for customer. And conform test also could be changed. We could, as the signal community, we could argue. And if nobody really on that feature and on that API, if there's people already using that one, then we need to think about the other way and how to migrate them to the new behavior.
I just think, Jim, thank you for the diligence, and maybe just as a next step, if you could share the kernel issue and we can revisit this. That seems like a clear course of action, but I don't want to discourage evaluating what we can do to be more efficient.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Just a quick time check. We've got 4 minutes and 2 topics.
Yeah, thanks. Whitney, do you want to quickly updates?
Yeah, hi. So this is a pretty, I think this is more of a check on where we are with the ask was to review 2 PRs. One of them is Tim Hawkin and we worked on the changes to the in-place pod vertical scaling design. And I think we're waiting on Derek to take a look. This is PR 1883. If you get the chance, please take a look. I think you're the last person to who needs to look at it and see if everything smells okay to you, no concerns. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them here. Have you had a chance to look at this one?
No, I've focused my upstream engagement on this present release, but I will hopefully have the code freeze be able to look at.
Yeah, we want to try and get this into 1.2.2. I just want to get an early start on this. So if there are any concerns, if we could look at it, and then whenever you get the chance, that would be great. The second one is CRI. Just adding, it's a process change. The PRR section was missing from our older incarnation of the KEP, and I added that. So that can possibly just be merged if there are no flags that you see. I'll follow up next week on this. Is that okay, Derek?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you, Vinay. And the next move to last topic, risk condition between scheduler and the Kubernetes, I think related to the memory management. So Alex, that's the what you proposed. Sorry.
Hi folks, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's not really related to the memory manager. I found this issue under one of our CI jobs, to be more specific, under the Hugh page job. So the problem that I saw, that pod was moved from pending phase to scheduled one. So it passed the scheduler, but after it, it was failed because kubelet said that it does not have enough resources, does not have enough Hugh patch resources. So, like, you are welcome to to leave any comments under the issue. And I'm pretty curious, why do we need like checks in both places, like in scheduler? It's the same check, like we have a feeds plugin in under the scheduler, and we also call to feeds plugin under the kubelet during the admit phase. And like in both places, we are using like different cache. So the picture of currently running pods can be different. And it's a place for the race condition, I believe. And like I don't want to take too much time, but I open for any discussion, and please leave your comments under the issue.
Looks like the problem is only limited on the Docker ship, right?
Maybe because our E2E node test is running on Docker ship. So I cannot say for sure if it's like reproducible under the containerd or under the cryo.
So okay, so even like we fix this problem, and so if that problems to the other container runtime, still we have the problem. Okay. I think we ran out of time, and Alucardo, thanks for report this problem. We can follow up through the issue, and I saw your PR to fix of the Docker shim already been merged. And I think that we need to call out and to make sure the cryo and the containerd don't have this problem. And we need to really also look at the initial issue. I have to figure out what's the initial issue, yeah. And just based on your discussing, we can follow up on the issue here. Okay, I think we ran out.
Sorry, folks, I just passed it incorrect issue, so I will repass the updated one because it's not the correct one. I'm sorry, it's some copy paste mistake. Yeah, because it will make more sense. Sorry.
No wonder this is confused me. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Okay. So then let's follow up in the issue and after meeting. So thanks everyone for today's meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.